Welcome. My name is Simka Horwitz. I'm the co-director at Massachusetts Farm to School. I'm really excited to welcome you to this afternoon's session on leading school food change in your community. We have an amazing team with us here from the Food Project who are going to be walking us through this great and interactive session. And some of you may have been part of other sessions in the conference so far. We hope you've been enjoying it. If you haven't, we are recording all of the sessions and you can find those on our website. We also still have a few spots remaining for some of the in-person field trips. So if that's something you're interested in, a tour of the fish pier in Boston, some school garden tours. There's some great stuff to check out later this week and on the weekend, and a good opportunity to meet up with people in person, primarily outdoors. So all of that you can find at massfarmtoschool.org/conference for more info about upcoming sessions and field trips. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Mass Farm to School, we are a statewide organization that works to increase the use of local food in school meals, as well as food education in schools. And we do that through a variety of ways, including professional development opportunities like this conference, networking and advocacy efforts. And outside of the conference, we have a lot of other learning opportunities we hope you keep an eye out for, and would love to stay connected beyond this week. So we hope you will stay in touch. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce today's speakers and turn it over to them. So as I mentioned, we have a great group. Actually, apologies. This slide is a little bit out of date. Group from the Food Project. We have Gabby Alvarez, Jonathan Forbes, E. Brown, and John Wang, and they're all going to get a chance to introduce themselves, and I will turn it over to them. Thanks so much for being with us.
Hi, everyone. I'm Gabby. I want to thank you all for taking the time out of your evening to join us today. We have an amazing workshop planned for you guys, and I hope you all have a great time. But before we get started, I do want to start off with a check-in question and introductions. And since there's a lot of us here, I want us all to take opportunity of the chat box and share our names, our pronouns if you're comfortable sharing them. And the check-in question is, what is your first memory of school food? And I'll place that in the chat box as well. I see tiny cartons of chocolate milk. I definitely agree. I think they still have like little like cow jokes on the back of the school milk box, and I think they're really funny. I see Denise Courtney, she, her, being excited to have a hot meal for lunch in middle school. Yes, definitely. Steve, he, him, his, terrible pizza. Yeah, I agree. Pizza Fridays, says Jonathan. PB&J, says Simka. Stephen Oram, he, him, something my friends had that I wanted to try, always brought food. Yeah, I always appreciate those friends who like share with you. They were real ones. John Wing, he, him. I remember the trays, mashed potatoes, and white bread. Yes. Howdy, Rowan, they, he, from Holyoke, Massachusetts here. I vividly remember having frozen treats as a dessert option in elementary school. That's interesting. I don't remember having that for my school. So that's interesting to see. Dale Hayes, I'm so sorry if I'm mispronouncing any of your names. Please correct me if I'm like mispronouncing them. She, her, Bozeman, Montana, school meals that rock. Jessica Brennan, she, her, public health and food system planner at the Metropolitan Area Planning Council. First memories equals mozzarella sticks. I actually never liked mozzarella sticks until recently, so I feel you. Dutch burgers in upstate New York and the delicious canned green beans, says Lisa Damon. E. Brown, they, them. I'm the community programs fellow at the food project. Yes, my mom used to work in my elementary school cafeteria, so I remember her being there a lot. That's really cool. Ellen Nyland, food service director, Webster Public Schools, grilled cheese. They always hit the spot. I don't know. They're just like, there's something about them. Yeah. These are really great responses. Thank you, everyone. And please keep them coming. As you're coming in here and thinking about that, let those thoughts marinate. And I'm just gonna pass it on to Jonathan.
Great. Hello, Jonathan. I use he, they pronouns. Obviously, we've got a pretty diverse group across the state here. So before we start, we're just gonna send out a brief assessment link and get like a baseline of where all our knowledge is on school food. So we'll take a couple minutes to get that through. I'll check back in maybe like a minute or two.
Do let us know if you can't get access to it from the link in the chat as well.
All right. Feel free to finish that up if you haven't got the chance to take it. We are gonna move on a little bit. So we're obviously all here because we care about topics around school lunch, and we all want to sort of work and make the system better. So before that, we're just going to acknowledge that we're all here continuing a lot of work that has already happened. So we were going to show a little presentation about the history of school food. John, if you want to share that, or I can put the link in the chat. Great. So just to briefly run through this, I won't go into too much depth. Starting at the top, school lunch programs started as an East Coast idea. So Boston and Philadelphia sort of bringing to light inequalities around food in the 30s. Like the main drivers of these organizations, the main drivers of school lunch were organizations, associations, teachers, before it really expanded into a federal program. From there, it becomes pretty dependent on who is running Washington. So for example, federal school lunch programs really expand under FDR's New Deal and LBJ's Great Society, and then experience like vast budget cuts under Reagan and more conservative policies. And then sort of fast forwarding to the next 30 years, or the past 30 years, the spotlight has really been back and emphasizing healthy foods and getting healthy foods into schools. Although it's not mentioned on the actual timeline here, just throwing a quick shout out to the Black Panther Party in the 60s for really molding our school food system in today with providing free hot breakfasts, where the government really saw that and also took parts of that and incorporated it into policy. All right, I think I'm all good there. So I'll pass it to John to talk about our next part.
Thanks, Jonathan. So we're going to have this part be a little bit more interactive. And then that timeline that Jonathan just shared, we have on a resource page so you can take a closer look at it. We know there's a lot of details and you could spend an enormous amount of time on school food history and all the different components, but didn't want to spend all the time here for that. So with that, we're going to move into kind of an activity where we're going to break you off into 3 different breakout groups. We're going to have you take a look at some case studies. So I wanted to share the process around that. So we'll be taking a look at some real life case studies, as I mentioned, around school food, a couple from here in the state, and then also another from a different part of the northeastern area. And so we'll be breaking you out into 3 groups, and Gabby, E, and Jonathan will be facilitating each one of those. And each room, the facilitator is going to share a respective and different case study with you and the original issue that they were trying to solve. And we're going to have you all just take a couple minutes to think on your own on what kinds of steps you would take yourself in trying to address that situation. And then you're going to have some space to actually share some of those reflections with each other in that group. And then after you hear from each other, you can all be in some dialogue with each other as well. So kind of like the breakdown in time is like you'll have a couple minutes to think on your own, like about 8-ish minutes for everyone to hear each other and go around in a circle, and then just like 10 minutes of space just to talk like with each other and dialogue with each other. And then after that, we're going to have one representative from each of the groups. Just once we reconvene in the large group, we're going to have them just represent and share kind of the thinking that came out as a theme in each of those groups. So with that, I think we'll hold for questions if there are questions for anyone and how that process works. I think the facilitators can answer those in particular. But with that, I think we're ready to go.
All right, I hope everybody had really awesome conversations in their breakout rooms. We had a really great one with case study number 3. So we're gonna come back together now and each share our groups. So if case study number 1 wants to come forward and talk about their group, and then I will give you a brief synopsis about the actual case study and some of the details that we thought were worth highlighting to you. So if the representative from case study 1 wants to come off mute.
Was that us, Gabby?
No, we're case study 2.
Case study 1 was my group.
Jonathan, are we 1? I'm sorry,
Yep.
Which one's 1?
We're 1.
Okay, so we shared a case study, or Jonathan shared a case study about students, and I'm going to paraphrase this and probably butcher the case study here, but students felt like that meal quality, time to sit down and eat lunch was really poor and insufficient. They felt like that there was a stigma around school meals, and they took a survey and they wanted more fresh food. So we asked ourselves, how could students advocate for change in this scenario? And Jonathan and Stephen talked about the incorporation of students in activities around school meals. So involving them in the production of meals and selection of recipes so that they really had a little bit of buy-in on what was being served. Ellen and myself talked a little bit about some of the ways to navigate some administration hurdles that exist in schools to try to accomplish change within school meals, because a lot of these factors are sort of barred by administration. So we had talked about ways to advocate for what you want, either through speaking up, through students joining local wellness policy committees in order to help edit and update local wellness policies to include goals that they may have for their school. And Ellen also mentioned, and Melanie, I'm sorry, echoed that an important step is paying school nutrition professionals a wage that is in line with their professional status, so that they feel empowered and can be empowered to make change in schools. So if I missed anything, someone jump in.
Great. I'm just going to share my screen really quick so you can see what I'm looking at. I love what you guys talked about, and just wanted to highlight that this case study was based in a small school district in Maine, and they had the benefit of being in their rural community, having their elementary and middle school students in one building. So it allowed them to have the middle school students help the elementary school students serve and eat, which is a huge benefit. Some of the other programs also had like high schoolers helping with middle school, but obviously that can be really limited by the size of your school district. Some of the other highlights that we talked about for this case study was, sorry, I'm looking at my notes. That they had like a wide variety of stakeholders with the students across two different age groups, as well as Full Plates, Full Potential being a really great partner. And you'll notice that in all of these case studies, partnerships are a huge factor to making these programs successful. Awesome. Does group 2 want to jump in, or if anybody has any final thoughts about group 1, you can also feel free. Sweet. We can move on to group 2.
Hey, folks. So in case study 2, we had a school aims to focus on making school food more reflective of the community's cultures while sourcing locally. And so asking where we would begin and how would we get these students involved. So some of the ideas that we had were to survey students in regards to their different communities and cultural backgrounds. And what that can look like is involving and also educating teachers, maybe having a community classroom day where you sit down and almost like a potluck, or even just conversations throughout the school where the students are able to reflect and talk to each other about, and talk to each other as well as their teachers about their different cultural backgrounds. Also contacting local urban farms to see if they offer produce that are specific to cultural backgrounds. So, there might be a specific food group that, say, or a cultural dish that these local farmers are able to help give us better access to those specific foods. We also talked about having conversations with parents, with the families themselves, to see if maybe they have some ideas, recipes, suggestions in regards to where they get their produce and where they locally source their foods. And then making it known and introducing to students to all of the school body who our local lunch people are. So, say the beginning of September, you come in and you have the students actually sit down and meet the people who are making their food each and every single day, so that way they have a better connection with them, and they know that, this is the person that they're able to meet and know the person's name that they're working with, and not just having, the person work in the back, and, not having that disconnection of who's doing this service for you. And if I missed any points, feel free to jump in and highlight those as well.
Awesome.
You did a great job. You you added most of the points.
Great. I love how much you talked about really uplifting cafeteria staff. They're really the heart of the stakeholders that you can pull together, whether it's students and other partner organizations. Making sure that your cafeteria staff are supported and appreciated is always like number one priority. Spending time with them and making sure students are spending time with them is huge. So in this case study, which was out in Western Mass, an organization called Nostra Comida worked with a charter school, the Holyoke Community College, and UMass Amherst with funding from the foundation, the Kellogg Foundation, to do all of the wonderful things that your group talked about. One thing that was different about these two case studies, number 1 and 2, also had kind of the benefit of running their own school food programs. Other programs in case study 3, we'll talk about Healthy Chelsea, have a sourcing contract with a company. So these last 2 case studies were unique, where they could source kind of independently school to school rather than district wide, which can be a huge benefit. Awesome. And then case study number 3.
Happy to share out for my group. We were working on a case study that focused on students struggling with health issues and discovering how to increase nutrition and health through food choices in the school meals program. We first of all discussed the importance of considering who is defining health and if this is a legitimate concern of the students and their families, or if it's a concern that's being put on the student population by other professionals inside or outside the community. And thinking also about different cultural norms for what health is, and making sure that you're identifying the root of the problem, if there is a problem that's related to health. And then after that is determined and established, we thought that a couple strategies one could take was focusing on restructuring the menu and looking at how you're sourcing food to look for healthier options that are lower in sugar and saturated fat. We were thinking about an example from Lowell that it works to include the fresh component of a meal, the fruit or the vegetable, within the main entree itself, so that students might be more willing to eat it as part of the main entree, and they don't have to necessarily specifically opt in, like, yes, I will have that vegetable on the side to increase the nutrition of my school meal. Compared to that, we also had, on the other hand, an offer versus serve model, where students have a variety of components and they're required to take at least 3 of those components every day for lunch, and one of the 3 of their options must be a fruit or a vegetable. But this model allows students to have more choice, which would increase their likelihood to eat what they take, and also to decrease food waste as a co-benefit. The other big thing that we touched on here was a cultural preference concern in seeing if students could be encouraged to eat more nutritious foods by changing the cultural diversity of foods that are offered, and if that might fit in better with what students are excited about. And so I think a session the other day was focusing on the tasting history program in Lowell, where a parent, teacher and student relationship was able to bring forward student supplied recipe book and actually institute those meals into the school lunch program, and that saw great uptake in participation. And so I'm assuming that those recipes include nutritious components, and if we're getting students excited and engaged by increasing their role in determining what is being served, especially if it's more culturally preferred for them and others at the school. That was also a great suggestion that we brought up in our group.
Great. Awesome. So I'm just going to flip to this next slide so you can see kind of the notes that we were talking about. These are kind of the breakdowns of the case studies of as you're going into these programs. What often comes up the most is identifying your stakeholders, your method. And then I would also say like your values are a huge piece of what your methods are. Like I think in this group, we talked a lot about define healthy and how that can be exclusive to cultural relevance for a lot of students. So thinking a lot about your stakeholders and in this case at Healthy Chelsea, they're in an urban community that has a lot of nonprofit support. And they also have a separate vendor outside of the school. And then they also had school institutions nearby, whether that was UMass Extension or the Chelsea Public Schools as a whole to partner with. Great. You all had wonderful ideas. Thank you for sharing. And I'm going to pass it back over to Jonathan, I believe.
So I think Gabby. But...
Yes, I think it is. It's
Sorry.
No worries. Okay, so I know we just all threw a lot at you and you're probably just like processing or you're like, wait, what's happening? So in order for us to let you like marinate your thoughts and just really take away what you talked about today, we have a resource and action sheet for you. I'm gonna list it in the chat box and then I'm going to share my screen and quickly go over it. Okay, bear with me. I'm gonna share my screen right now. Okay, can you guys see that? Awesome. Okay, so what we have here is a school food resource and action sheet. And we have different links dedicated to different things. So the first one being the graphic of school food timeline, which is the timeline that Jonathan went over earlier today. Next, we have the rethinking of school lunch, which is a framework for improving school food and supporting sustainable food systems. Then we have the USDA National School Lunch Program, where there's a lot of resources that you can dig into and just discover there. We have a values and action link, which talks about details about the full plates, full potential case study that we shared during the workshop and that we talked about. And then we have the Michigan High Schools Call for Change in National School Food Policy, which is another case study that we did not get to go over today. We have the Massachusetts legislative actions. We didn't get into the legislative strategies in this workshop, but we listed it there just in case you were interested in it. And then the case study details that E just shared. And last but not least, we have some structures for you guys to just look over and just really like dive deep into it. And I hope you guys take that with grace. And yeah, thank you all for just like really just being great out here and sharing.
Right, so with that, with the workshop we are gonna revisit sort of that same assessment that we took in the beginning and see if our answers have changed a little bit. And at the bottom, there is a place for you to leave your contact information and any suggestions or feedback about the workshop.
And we do also have, after folks have had a chance to fill that out, we have a very brief session evaluation, just I think 3 questions that we've also just dropped into the chat and would appreciate participants to do for really helping us think about planning this conference in future years. And we have just a couple questions a couple minutes. So I know, Jonathan, you've got another question to do. I'll turn it back over to you.
Yep. So once you guys finish up with the Google form, feel free to leave in the Zoom chat. We're gonna sort of revisiting that first check-in question of your first memory of school food. With that, What is a positive memory that you hope others can have with school food in the future? And you can just leave your answers in the chat.
Cool, yeah. So as you're wrapping up with that, so I didn't know if you had any other components that you wanted to share, but just thank you from us, as like this is a first pass at like developing something to raise awareness about different school food components. So as you answer the check-in question and see that form that Jonathan contributed, we'd appreciate any kind of feedback, suggestions, or thoughts as we move forward with it. So I'll pass it over to Simka.
Yeah, thanks so much. As John mentioned, we're really kind of starting this process of exploring how to really get more people thinking, including more students, thinking about having a bigger voice in school food change. So really appreciate everyone's participation today, and hope you'll also join us for other sessions in the conference, and also some of the in-person ones. We have a field trip this Sunday. Another great opportunity to hear from some incredible youth leaders at Boston's Epiphany School, where they're doing some of this, some of the very things we talked about today, of like incorporating culturally connected foods from into the school garden, and then bringing those into the school meal program. So could be a fun way to see what it looks like when some of this stuff we discussed today actually gets put into practice. So that is one you can still register for, and really want to thank everyone for joining us today. Yeah, so I'll leave. We also will be making some of these resources that they shared available afterwards to participants. So if you didn't click on the various Google Docs, we will have access to those later, and be sure that you can get them at a later date. So thanks again for joining us today, and thanks so much to all of you for organizing this and presenting.